Now, Bluefarm, as we know it, is a very flexible deck. So it's very difficult sometimes to know when we're mulliganing what card should we be looking for. So I went to Twitter and asked people to craft their perfect hands. And today I have Matt Sperling, a much better player than I am, look through all the hands and give his feedback on which ones he liked, and also ultimately show us at the end what hand he crafted.
Hey everyone, I'm Matt Sperling. I'm a member of the Playing with Power team. I'm a professional Magic player off and on for the last 20 years or so. Been enjoying a lot of CDH recently, so that's what brought me into this discussion. Happy to be having this conversation here.
Let's start with this one. Jewel Lotus, Lotus Petal, Cavern of Souls, Fierce Guardianship, Mana Crypt, Wheel of Fortune, Mox Amber. And their line is Cavern on Zombie, Lotus, Amber, Crypt, Cast Uncountable Crom, and Wheel.
Yeah, so there's a lot to unpack here, but there's a couple flaws in the game plan. First flaw is in the line itself, Cavern on Zombie, Lotus. Now your plan is completely transparent. You Cavern Zombie first. So people who did have any interest in countering Crom, presumably that's why you got Cavern, you're excited about it. People can just counter the Lotus so you would always want to play those cards in the other order.
Yes.
Lotus, then Cavern. So, again, something to pick up there. But also just like what this hand is going for, which is like a Crom and a Wheel, or any of these best hands that terminates in a draw 7. The problem is that there's a lot of variance in the draw 7. The table draws 21 cards, you draw 7. It's often gonna be pretty good for you. I don't know the hypothetical said we're in the first seat, did it?
It did, yeah. Where this is like
in the first seat.
You're
Okay.
in the best position.
Yeah.
First seat.
So Wheels get better, and obviously this hand's awesome, but Wheels aren't as good as some of the things we'll be talking about later in terms of like where I think you should be aiming, don't be afraid to dream big, right? We're going to need to tease out different kinds of a lot in terms of win percentage. And this one's just not going to get done often enough. You're going to have a bad wheel sometimes. And even when Crom draws you 2 more cards, and someone else's wheel might be, they're off to the races, right? They're going to play an Underworld Breach with their wheeled graveyard. And you have 3 other players that can get something like that. So it's just too much variance. We're talking about the absolute tier 1 best hands. This one's got a couple problems.
I think something to bring up here is the information you're leaking by your sequence of cards. So here, the original order leaks as much information as possible and gives your hands perfect knowledge how to disrupt you, while a simple reversal of that hides as much information as possible.
The information does have value. I mean, it's definitely non-zero value. It's not always the most important thing, but it definitely has value. And these situations can be good to think about away from the table because there actually was a better way to sequence it. Pretty easy thing to miss.
So let's move on to this one over here. I really like this one. 2 fetches, a crypt, force, Rhystic, misstep, and any tutor.
A clear keep. I mean, you're going to keep it. So the line is land, mana crypt, Rhystic Study, and you've got force and misstep. Well, there's a redundancy there, right? Force requires you to pitch a blue card. You're not going to get to also use the misstep, right? Because you're going to have to pitch it. So that second fetch or the tutor either one would probably, maybe any tutor, I guess I'll pick Mystical Tutor, but okay. Setting that aside, you probably want a blue card there, right? So you probably improve this hand simply by doing that. You're going to untap with whatever cards Rhystic provided you, plus your land, plus your mana crypt. And this is in like the category of hands. We're probably going to see a lot of them that sort of terminate in Rhystic Study. Like that's your payoff. And there are some that we're going to see that terminate in a draw 7, like a Wheel or a Time Twister. But the Rhystic Study ones, Rhystic Study is going to bump your win rate up. On turn 1, it's you're going to, instead of winning 25%, all else equal, or maybe in C1 you win 30% baseline, you're going to be up there towards 65, 70% maybe, right? Going first with a Mana Crypt and a Rhystic Study, like your win percentage is going to be really high. Now, some players might say, look, and I think good players should do this, open up a discussion with the other 3 players saying, hey, we might be able to keep this person off of a 65, 75% win rate by not feeding into this Rhystic. And, sometimes you'll get a player that says, you know what, I've got 1 land and a bunch of mana rocks, I can't do that. Okay, but at least you tried. Doesn't really cost you much to try. Other times, folks are able to develop, off by a turn. That can be really valuable.
Okay. Let's pretend that we removed the land and added a Swan Song instead, and the tutor is now a Vampiric Tutor. What cards are you thinking of for that Vampiric Tutor when you're keeping this hand?
It's going to be modal. You're not going to have to decide ahead of time in this situation, because what you'll do is you'll see how much they're feeding Rhystic Study, right? And if folks are feeding it, then the cards you draw will dictate, okay, what complements those cards? What do I need a tutor for? Maybe it's Dockside. Maybe everyone's feeding it and putting a bunch of artifacts out. I'm going to vamp for Dockside because I drew other action. If they're not feeding it, maybe my plan is to, try to then wheel away or Time Twister away all those things that they've been saving up. I'm going to wait to see what folks are doing and what I'm drawing before I figure out what to tutor for.
So now that we have these two hands, this one that is more focused with a payoff with interaction, and this other one with a Rhystic study, if you were to rank these two hands right now, which one would you rather have?
I would definitely rather have the one that's Rhystic study with counters in your hand. Rhystic study is like sometimes can fail when you don't see the force of will, so people just like fight through it, so it helps you there. The wheel also, like, you don't know if other players are going to keep their hands. So oftentimes you might be wheeling at a table where someone's mulligan to 3 or 4 cards. It's going to get that person back in the game. So I think the Rhystic study hand is actually quite a bit stronger in my view. So I'd put that one first of the two hands we've seen so far.
All right, let's move on to this next one over here. Command Tower, Chromox, blue card for Chromox. Take your pick. Lotus Petal, Thoracle, Console, and Pact of Negation. So this hand's interesting because there's actually quite a few answers like this where it's the turn 1 Console.
Not bad. I think there's maybe some inefficiency here. And then there's one note about like deck construction. Okay, so they go Command Tower, Chromox, Lotus Petal, Thoracle. So this is a deterministic line. I like that a lot. It's gonna win the game, protected once. So that's good. But I think this hand is like strictly worse than the hand that I'm gonna pick than my hand, because there's a very limited number of interaction spells that are possible on your turn 1 going first. This line is turning on both Misstep and Mindbreak Trap. So this is a good hand. It's probably the best of the hands we've seen so far, but I think it's got a couple issues there. Is Chromox imprinted blue card? Is that really the best that you can do? The other thing is, like, wouldn't I rather have Mana Crypt Talisman or Arcane Signet? If I'm going to use 2 cards to get 1 blue mana, yes. I get to untap with 3 mana instead of 2. The deck construction thing, Pact of Negation just isn't in my list and isn't in Koval's list. It's not a card that we really love in Bluefarm, so you sort of have to.
Players are off Pact of Negation.
You have to start. Yeah, when you're in a mid-range deck, it's really not interaction. It's protection. It's pure protection for the most part. I mean, of course, if you get to 5 mana, it can be some interaction later, but we haven't found that pure protection is actually warranted in a T&K type of strategy the same way it would be in like a Turbo Grixis strategy. What if this does get countered? What if the table does have 2 interaction? There's a couple of problems. First of all, I may have to pay for Pact of Negation, so I may lose the game. So if you can see Pact of Negation is not the ideal protection, because I'm going to literally die on my next upkeep. So those are so this hand is sort of like good but dominated. There are going to be other hands that are like strictly better than it because they don't turn on Mindbreak Trap, they untap with more mana when they get thwarted, they don't have a pact trigger to pay for when they get thwarted. So I know I said a lot there, but I think there's a lot to learn here because this hand is sort of good, but there's swaps you can make that like strictly improve it.
So something else important to bring up here is that once you lock in your line, you can start trying to think of lines that will beat yours and try to either eliminate those by your sequence of cards or gauge the likelihood of the things that beat you and apply appropriate risk assessment for you to, make your decisions. Yeah, and so far, win turn 1 better than the Rhystic study.
I would. If they're able to stop this win, then they can stop your Rhystic study also. And so I'd rather, the times they can't stop me, I'd rather win the game. So that's an important thing to note also, right? So you think about people are saying, well, I don't want to just jam a win. Then if I get stopped, I don't have much going. Well, okay, but if you pick a hand that just plays Rhystic and that gets countered, you don't have much going, then like you haven't bought yourself a whole lot. And if you say, well, no, because I still get to untap with, a land or 2 and a Mana Crypt, sure, but like you should not be optimizing towards like that small preservation of equity versus like actually winning the game instead of putting Rhystic out. So yeah, this is my favorite hand so far. It actually wins the game. It's protected once, and that's roughly, I think, as good as you're gonna find, I think. And even though this one's not optimal, we'll talk about that.
So this hand by Ken Ballman is slightly different, where it has a Mystic Remora instead of Vampiric Tutor.
This is probably a better version of the Rhystic study, arguably a better version of the Rhystic study line, where you get a Remora out as well, so you can actually lead on like land Remora. That might get countered, but a lot of times folks won't counter it. And in which case, now if somebody decides to then fight over your Rhystic study, you're gonna be drawing cards off Remora, and that's helpful. The problem is, what if the table just says, look, we're gonna go slow. You don't have anything proactive. So yeah, you're gonna win that game a huge chunk of the time, but again, like, what's a huge chunk? If it's only 80% or 85%, that's a lot, but I better not be giving up something that wins 90%, 95%. Yeah. So I don't think this is among the best things you can possibly do, but it's actually a really good line among Rhystic study lines. I like it.
So one thing I've noticed about early Mystic Remora hands in some games is that some players choose not to feed it, and all it does is tax the original player's mana while everyone else playing creatures or now paying for like studies and stuff like that. So in this hand, if players choose not to play into it, as you said, you're not doing that much versus the other Rhystic Study hand where you always have the Vampiric Tutor to do something. Would you rate this above the other Rhystic Study hand?
Yeah. The thing I like about this one, though, I mean, this hand is set up to like potentially allow opponents to misplay. A lot of the other lines, like there's no way an opponent misplays because they're just going to have to counter what you're doing. Like you're going to put Demonic Consultation on stack, like they're going to have to counter. This one, somebody might make a mistake, like not using their Force of Negation on your Remora to allow the table to like interact with both things. So, I mean, it has that going for it. I like it. It just ultimately, I think it just like terminates in, you know, an 85% win percentage or something really high, but just not quite as high as like a protected win, I don't think.
Let's go over your hand.
Okay. Lotus Petal, Silence, a fetch land, Rite of Flame, and that could be Simian Spirit Guide. That could be Mana Crypt. I mean, it's probably better as Mana Crypt, but anyways. Underworld Breach, Brain Freeze, Lion's Eye Diamond. This is not just a single protected deterministic win, but one that does not turn on Mindbreak Trap, and one where the table has to make a decision when you cast Silence off of your fetch land about how likely you are to win the game, as opposed to just like using it to, which I've done before, sometimes using it to just make sure your Rhystic Study hits or make sure your wheel sticks. Does this hand beat Mental Misstep and Force of Will? No. So if the table has two non-Mindbreak Trap interaction, then the hand is left pretty barren. I mean, if you replace Rite of Flame with Mana Crypt, which probably makes sense, then you'll have a Mana Crypt and one land. Yeah, it's not ideal. The other thing you can do with the land silence line, the players might start talking and posturing. You might get a read. It's very common that players, oh, should I counter that silence? They start talking about it. Yes, counter the silence. I've got interaction. Yes, counter the silence. It'll turn on my Force of Will. Well, then I don't have to go for the win if I believe that. If my read is that that's an earnest conversation. So that's an advantage. Again, like this hand doesn't let people play perfectly like some of the other lines, but look, it doesn't, like there's nothing to talk about. I go for my consult win, and you're going to just have to stop it. So this hand has a number of advantages, like strictly better than some of the other turn one wins. It's also just deterministic. Like you have Underworld Breach, Brain Freeze, LED. So I think this is the best hand. It's obviously the one I submitted, but it just has those clear benefits.
So something that's really interesting about what you've said that I really like is this idea of denying your opponents the ability to play with perfect information. That's something that you consciously built into your hand. And while, you know, I can't interview anyone else, I assume the other ones were playing more towards simply like, how do I stop or how do I protect my win? While yours is also baking into the idea of like, you know, how do I obfuscate information, right? So I think that's just really cool and something that I'm going to try to bake in more to how I play Magic. Is there anything else you wanted to share or add after this exercise?
No, hopefully we can link to my list for Timnacrom in the description of the video. And if folks have questions about like TNK specifically, you know, tag me at Sickofit on Twitter, and if you have questions about TNK, I can answer them there. But in general, I think it's like one of the stronger decks. I think it's not the only strong deck. It's not like it's the be all end all. I mean, it's a good deck to try also because it lets you play in those different modes, lets you play longer games, some shorter games. It's definitely a good exercise if you want to build that CDH muscle. So recommend the archetype. Check out the list that's in the description.
Awesome. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.